And I want to mention also, yes, I want to mention that we're recording this for very limited distribution to people who would otherwise have attended but are unable to. If you have a concern about that, let us know. Let us know. And I want to thank the group, the people who helped out organizing this standard and tailored plan disaster meeting, including Steve Benson, Sarah Hartz, Therese Garrett, Carlisle Johnson, Karen Gray, and Christina Bowman, and myself for taking the time to organize this meeting. I'm kind of co-chairing this meeting with Christina Bowman, who I think you all know and is central to the work we're doing with disaster planning for standard and tailored plans. And mention that I'll be stepping down as chair of the North Carolina Disaster Behavioral Health Committee as of July 1st. Christina will become a co-chair, and she will be sharing that co-chairship with Erica Wise, a psychologist who's been doing a great deal of work with the committee, and particularly, and just in general, in disaster response through the Red Cross and through the committee. I think that's about it. I think maybe it's time to get started with our first presentation. Thanks to Thomas Parrott of Human Services at North Carolina Emergency Management, and Rebecca Pittman of the, I think the Atlantic Division of the Red Cross, for presenting to us on recent disaster operations, but more particularly kind of what shelters are likely to look like in the coming year. Thanks very much. Take it away.
All right, good morning, everybody. As Andy said, my name is Rebecca Pittman, and I am, you were close, Andy, Southeast Division of the Red Cross, but all the same nonetheless. I support the Carolinas and Georgia as a state relations director, and I'm really excited to present with Thomas this morning. Thomas, do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to share yours?
If you can share yours, I think you have the latest version.
Sure. Let me do that really quick. All right, can you see the full presentation, Thomas?
Yep.
All right, I will let you take it away then.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas Parrott. I'm from North Carolina Emergency Management under the Department of Public Safety. Recently started this position within the past, about to say almost 3 months now, as a human services planner for the department. Currently, we handle anything regarding human population, regarding feeding, sheltering, evacuations, disaster transport, and reunification, along with pets and livestock within the state. The following presentation is basically going to be a general update for the 2023 hurricane season that started as of, what was it, like 4 days ago. So yeah, hopefully this will be a good learning experience for everyone. And with that, we'll go on to the next slide. Is this mine or yours? I think
I think it's yours, but
Is mine? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, the topics for this discussion are going to be an overview of the North Carolina Shelter Plan that has seen some updates that are currently going through the approval process as we speak and should be posted within the next month or so. Along with sheltering guidance updates presented by, I believe, the Red Cross with Ms. Pittman. Some updates from the Human Services Branch and NCEM in general. Red Cross updates for this coming year. How to connect with local counties for individual response. And then looking forward into the future, what other plans we have coming. So for the overview of the North Carolina Shelter Plan, is this mine or yours? I can't remember.
It's yours.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, so North Carolina currently is under a tiered approach for sheltering. So sheltering always begins as a local responsibility. So your county, your local municipality, your indigenous tribes. From there, it goes up to host counties and shelters. So for example, under the new policy that we have that's about to be published within the next month is called NCAS. Basically handles using host counties to basically fill the state need for shelter using a mutual aid sheltering style, where North Carolina Emergency Management would pay local counties to increase their shelter capacity and then pay them for sheltering other people or other counties' residents during disasters. For counties that may not have the ability to shelter within their county due to safety or availability of shelters or personnel. And the next step from there is state coordinated shelters. This is run in affiliation with NCEM Human Services, Department of Social Services, and the American Red Cross to fulfill large congregate shelters to backfill areas where host counties cannot make up for it or just surge in population. County sheltering entities, these are basically varied upon each county's contracts with different agencies, such as the American Red Cross or their local DSS for their internal capabilities. For that, they can reach out to their local Red Cross agency or partners or their county DSS for their current standings. As far as the positioning for kind of not accountability, but more the roles, North Carolina Emergency Management Human Services Branch is the lead state agency for state sheltering operations. The lead technical agency is the North Carolina Department of Social Services within the Department of Health and Human Services branch, not branch, department. That might have been misworded. Begin PowerPoint. Oh well. And then the lead support agency is the American Red Cross.
And one of the things that we really like to highlight here is that tiered approach and who those responsible entities are, because it can sometimes feel very confusing. You're not sure necessarily if you've been asked to come in and support from a mental health perspective in a shelter. It is important to understand the nuances of who is managing the shelter, because it will impact how you coordinate in that shelter. So that's one of the reasons why we try and highlight where sheltering, begins and ends as we scale up for a large scale operation, and also who is ultimately responsible and how that really varies county by county, depending on what that local emergency management entity looks like and how they have chosen to structure within their county. It's really important for us to highlight that, so that when you do respond to a shelter, you've got a good understanding of who those partners are, who those players are, and some of those nuances. So a couple updates for 2023 shelter guidance and kind of our approach. We are back to congregate sheltering for evacuation sheltering, and pretty much any shelter scenario, we're going to use congregate sheltering as our primary model. The Red Cross has rescinded its mask policy or its mask requirement. As you may remember, in 2022, when we did this presentation, we were still requiring masks for our workforce and for our clients. We were not going to, we recognized that we weren't going to be able to fully enforce that with clients and shelters, but we were going to try. We were going to really recommend it for our public health perspective, from the public health perspective, to keep people safe. We have now rescinded that policy. Masks are now optional for everyone in shelters, both for workforce as well as the clients that are staying in the shelter with us. But they will be available for anyone who chooses to wear a mask, who would prefer to wear a mask. That's perfectly acceptable. We will continue to have all of our PPE available in Red Cross managed shelters to ensure that if folks need a mask or would like one but don't have one, that we have those resources available. The second piece of that is that the Red Cross transitioned all of our COVID specific guidance that we developed. When we talk about COVID guidance, that's everything from our mask policy to spacing of cots in a shelter, so on and so forth. We've transitioned all of that guidance to be infectious disease guidance so that it can be reactivated at any point in time for any scenario that's needed. So a good example would be if we had a norovirus outbreak in a single shelter, we could activate all of that same COVID, those same COVID guidelines to ensure that we were spacing people out, that we were really reinforcing hand washing and things like that to help reduce and mitigate the spread of norovirus in a shelter. And that can be done on a shelter by shelter basis. We may do it for an entire operation. So if we do have a large, if it's in a winter month and we have, high flu rates going around, we may enact these same policies to reduce the spread of flu in a shelter for an entire operation. So all the shelters across the operation. It's really going to be situation dependent, but we enjoy that we now have that flexibility to turn on and to pull those levers and turn on and off those guidelines as needed based on the scenario. The last piece that's kind of an update that will resonate with folks here is that our non-congregate sheltering option. So when you think non-congregate, a lot of people think hotels. So think that when we talk about non-congregate sheltering, it will remain an option, but it will only be utilized if a government entity initiates that model. So Red Cross will not go to non-congregate sheltering first if we have a need to shelter a large number of folks. The biggest driver for this is FEMA has now moved their non-congregate sheltering policy so that it can be reimbursed for states and counties, government entities, if they choose to go that route. They may be eligible for that FEMA reimbursement. The Red Cross is not directly eligible for any FEMA reimbursement. And so that's why we say if it's going to be used, it's going to be at the decision of the local government or the state government to enact that policy or to use that method of sheltering. The Red Cross will still engage in non-congregate sheltering if a government entity chooses to go that route, but we will have to work out a specific agreement with that government entity at the time that they want to use it to ensure that we're doing what's expected of us, they're doing what's necessary to potentially seek that FEMA reimbursement, and that everybody is on the same page about how that's going to work. Because it's, once money is involved and once the federal government is involved, there's lots of very specific things that we have to do. So from the Red Cross perspective, we just want to make sure that we are supporting counties and state partners in that effort, should they choose to go down that path. Thomas, is there anything you want to add on this slide?
No, that pretty much sums up North Carolina's approach, or new approach, I guess, updated after COVID-19 to sheltering as it stands.
Sure thing. All right, this one's you.
Awesome. So for, as you may have heard, the North Carolina Emergency Management has had a huge restructuring over the past couple of months, especially with Human Services. Myself and Raina are brand new to the organization and are currently the only ones within the Human Services branch. I myself transferred over from the logistics section, so I've had at least 1 year within the agency, but it's still a very new time for both of us. At current standpoint, a branch manager position has been posted and will likely be filled within the next month or two. And with plans to hire at least 3 more or 2 more planners after that for regional response. That will be covered in a later presentation done by Raina. For current community involvements, NCEM participates in various different functions within the Human Services branch, whether that be the Food and Safety Defense Task Force. Yes. Yep, I believe I got that acronym correctly. We have the Disaster Mental Health Committee. We have the CMIST, or which is blanking right now. It is the great. Sorry, it's been a long day already. The CMIST.
It primarily supports the health services group, Thomas, and I can't remember the full CMIST acronym, but it's communication, mobility. I can't remember what the I stands for, but it's for health services support.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Rebecca. And then we also handle other. Yes. Thanks, Stephanie Payne. Approach to supporting access and functional needs. Thanks, Christina, as well. Yeah, along with various other individual committees are revolving around human services, access and functional needs, pet services, and livestock, along with feeding and sheltering. For the CRESS overhaul, for those unaware, CRESS was our coastal regional evacuation sheltering plan, basically determining or limiting counties on the coast's ability to shelter. So heavy reliance on moving them towards central North Carolina for sheltering operations. We have since are in the process, in the final stages of entering in our NCASF, which is the North Carolina All Hazard Shelter Support Plan, which basically will take the form of turning or providing monetary supplements to counties that choose to be host shelters for evacuating counties for all types of disasters, whether that be a hurricane or a nuclear incident or a incident of roughly any size. This plan was to basically shift from a specific incident to an all hazards approach, along with providing monetary compensation to ensure counties are beefing up their own county capacity to limit the need for the state to constantly support a state coordinated shelter, which can be extremely expensive for an average operation, while county operations would pose a limited strain for state funding. The plan for that is to come out within the next month, currently going through the final stage of revision with our director, and should be pushed out to our partners, which should include this committee within the next month or so. Along with NCEM, we're currently trying to get back into county engagements. So due to our current limited staffing of 2 people, our abilities to conduct training exercises template engagement or template creation and county visits are very limited, as we are currently trying to work through plans for the next hurricane season and develop updates and get basically up to speed with our partners to ensure that everything is currently running smoothly. Our plans are to get these back up to speed within the next by at least the end of the summer, with our hiring on of a new branch manager and hopefully a new planner. We should be able to we should be able to get out to perform trainings, set up exercises with most of our partners and county agencies, create further templates for use for our pet sheltering and county shelter plans if need be, along with conducting visits for outreach. And with that, we'll move on.
All right. So then just some Red Cross updates for the season. Much like last year, we talked about the supportive community initiative, but this is just reinforcing that this is an annual and ongoing conversation. And this is where we sit down with our county and our state level partners to have conversations about what our mass care resources are in that locality. So at a county level, how many volunteers do we have in your community? How many are trained to open and operate shelters? How many can provide feeding support? Things like that. We want to have those really detailed conversations, both at the county and the state level, so that we can set baseline commitments and really level set those expectations for what a Red Cross response looks like. And when I say baseline, what I mean is that minimum commitment level, so that every county understands where the Red Cross will be able to plug in and support and where we won't have the capacity immediately. We may have the capacity in 24 hours or 72 hours by deploying folks into that area, but really level setting so that nobody has unrealistic expectations of who's going to do what. And then that can also lead to that third bullet, which is all about local capacity building conversations. So really making sure that we're taking the time with our county and state partners to understand where do we have untapped resources. At a county level, this is conversations about, who are those active and engaged groups in your community? Who are those, maybe it's a faith-based community, a church, or maybe it's a community group or a community center that really has a lot of investment in their local community. So then it's about having that conversation on how can we engage them to support when a disaster happens. Maybe it's not in sheltering. Maybe they decide that's not what they want to do, but ultimately we're still bringing them into the fold so that we already have those links before a disaster happens. And they're a part of that larger whole community approach at the county level. So those conversations continue to be ongoing, and they've gone really well so far this year. The second piece for us and being ready for hurricane season is all about our internal readiness. So this spring, we've been going through a lot of internal capacity building efforts. So making sure that we have trained and available shelter workers. We just recently, a couple weeks ago, did a shelter supervisor boot camp, which is essentially for those folks that would serve as shelter managers in individual shelters across the state. To really provide them not necessarily with the official shelter manager training, because that's more about forms and processes and things like that, but really to take the time to teach them soft skills, talk about scenarios, how to do conflict resolution, and just some of those skills that our shelter managers may or may not have, depending on how long they've been with the Red Cross, what they did in their previous life prior to being a Red Cross volunteer. So we're really working through that process and ensuring that our folks are ready to go ahead of this hurricane season. We've also been busy confirming our shelter locations are still good locations. We still have agreements in place, and that our sheltering supplies are ready to go. Same thing with our feeding vendors. When we think about shelters, feeding always comes along with those shelters, right? Because you've got to feed the people in your care. So making sure that all of our feeding vendors are still on our books and available to support, and really understanding what their lead time is to fulfilling specific requirements. So at what point do we need to give them a 24 or a 48-hour notice that we will need food for X number of people? And our ultimate goal for, especially for hurricane shelters, is that all of our shelters are self-sustaining for 72 hours. And this is really because once, we all know once tropical storm force winds start, we can't move people anymore. We can't move resources. So we're really in that hunker down period until those winds subside. And so our goal is to make sure that any Red Cross managed shelter is self-sustaining for 72 hours, so we can get through that that period and then start moving in additional resources and providing that higher level of care for our clients. A couple more exciting things on the Red Cross front. We will be launching a new shelter registration application this year. We're very excited about it for Red Cross managed shelters. It will be a web-based registration. It does have offline capabilities if we don't have access to internet, so that's already taken care of. But what this is going to do for us is provide a higher level of visibility on who's in our shelters and what their needs are. And when I say who's in our shelters, I really mean the types of people, how many males, how many females, how many pets do we have in the shelters? What are their ongoing needs from a health perspective, a mental health, spiritual care perspective? What kind of recovery roadblocks are they going to have? Things like that, to really have that visibility at a higher level and be able to manage the information we are collecting is going to be really helpful for us to plan for how we can help transition folks out of shelters once we're to that point where folks are either returning home or deciding what their next step is going to look like because they can't return home. The hope is next year we will have a partner portal where our DSS managed shelters or other partner managed shelters can also register clients into that application so that we can see that full picture of who we're sheltering across the state of North Carolina. This is going to continue to be a work in progress, but we've already seen great things coming from the pilot of this registration app this spring with the Red Cross. So we're very excited about the potential there and what that can do for us in the way that we support our clients throughout a disaster. The very last piece of this, and then I'll turn it back over, I think, to Thomas, is every shelter, every day, every need. And this is really all about resourcing and communicating with our Red Cross managed shelters. So what that looks like is every single day, once the immediate storm threat has passed, we have a Red Cross logistics team with a box truck full of the commonly needed items, material items for a shelter, that's showing up at every single Red Cross shelter and saying, all right, what do you need today? Let's make sure we fill those material resources, but also giving the shelter manager the space to say, hey, these are the other struggles that I'm having. This is what I really need support with. And then making sure that there's quick resolution on those to ensure that every single need that a shelter has is filled in 24 hours or less, so that can really increase the care that our clients get in a shelter setting. So those are cross updates for the year. Oh, I think this is actually my slide too, Thomas. Sorry, I lied to you. So this next part is all around wraparound services. This is the stuff that is really important. We often, when we talk about sheltering, we often just kind of talk about it from the singular shelter. What are we doing to keep people safe and comfortable while they're at a shelter? But the wraparound services are really, really critical, because these are also life-sustaining support mechanisms. So obviously feeding is a large part of sheltering and the work that we do in that space. Health, mental health, and spiritual care are critical to ensuring that our clients are able to stay in the shelter, but also have a safe environment while they're in the shelter. We recognize that not everybody is coming to a shelter with everything they need, all the resources at their fingertips, and they will be able to stay in the shelter and deal with whatever impacts of the disaster come just because. We know that when you open a shelter, you're essentially getting a microcosm of your everyday community. So there will be all of these needs in our shelter, and we have to be prepared to meet those needs. And that's not just from a Red Cross perspective, but from a DSS and a state support perspective. We understand that that is just the standard of care that we need to be prepared to provide. So same thing for pet sheltering, that multi-agency shelter transition team. Those are our teams that are going to come and provide that initial casework support and ensure that we are able to help folks transition and move on the road to recovery, whatever that looks like for them following the disaster. And then the state functional and access support teams, or those FAST teams, to make sure that when we open a shelter, we are really being considerate and thinking through all of the functional and access needs. We're really working with our disability integration partners to ensure that any need or any reasonable accommodation that we need to make in a shelter, that we are making, and ensuring that folks can successfully and independently move about the shelter as best they can. Thomas, was there anything you wanted to add on this slide?
Not for this slide.
Okay, perfect. And now I think I'm turning it over to you.
Awesome. Yeah. So one of the best ways to help reach out, or I guess this is more designed towards working within your own counties, is to reach out to a county emergency management office, which should be within each municipality, county, or tribal nation. You can connect with the area coordinators or branch managers. So for state of North Carolina, it's broken up into 15 different areas, 1 through 5 on the east, 5 in the middle, 5 on the west. Each are based out of branch offices. One's located in Lenoir, the other is located in Burlington, and the other one's located in Catawba County. Reaching out to any of those for, I guess, sorry, comments or questions regarding shelter support will be, I guess, a secondary conversation. Anything regarding deployments will go through NCEM Human Services. So myself, Raina, the new branch manager, and then deployment by Christina Bowman, or whoever's handling the mental health position within state emergency operations or state EOC.
So then for how to connect with the Red Cross, we recommend that if you already know who kind of your local point of contact is within these different colored geographies, these are all of our chapter boundaries, which is kind of our most local entity for the Red Cross. If you already know who that person is, feel free to reach out to them by phone, email. But if you're not sure who that is, you can go online to redcross.org. You can type in your zip code and it'll give you the chapter website for who those local points of contact are. If you're not sure who that is, you can also connect with the regional staff. Those websites will also say who the regional disaster officer is, or you can always reach out to the state relations team, which is myself, and then a team of volunteer liaisons that if you've been in the state EOC, you'll often interact with. So you can use any of those methods to reach out to the Red Cross to talk about how we can partner together at that local level. And I think this one was you, Thomas.
Yep. So going forward, as we all know, hurricane season started about 4 days ago. So we provided a list of the upcoming names for this season. For us in general, the ongoing priorities are to rebuilding and refocusing programs, considering that we have been kind of on the back burner for the past 3 months as we've been rebuilding our branch and trying to restart and jump back into different programs. Our ongoing concerns are to basically get back up to speed to where our previous branch manager, when she left, how operations were handling, and then improve from there, along with ongoing capacity building within different counties. To account for the changes with the NCAS, capacity building is going to be critical. Our capacity building is going to be a critical focus within the next few years as we try to push more towards county sheltering rather than a state coordinated shelters. Those state coordinated shelters will still be an option. We're also the all hazards approach to sheltering. So with the publishing of the NCAS, we're trying to ensure that we as a state are able to respond to all different types of incidents that may require sheltering, not just hurricanes, which are primarily have been in plans for years. So to accompany for nuclear disasters, wildfires, things of that nature, to ensure that the state's ready for anything that Mother Nature can throw at us. So for the hurricane season, the forecasting started on May 15th with hurricane season officially starting 4 days ago. Supplemental names lists are to your left. And anything going forward regarding natural disasters, or I guess weather updates, will be posted through our meteorologist branch that should come out with daily emails sent to program managers within NCEM.
So with that, I think it's time for any questions. Thomas and I will do our best to answer whatever questions y'all have. And so Andy, I will defer to you on kind of how you want to manage questions, things like that.
Okay, yeah, I think let's put questions in the chat and we'll try to pick them out of there. Thanks very much. That was a really helpful presentation to give us kind of an orientation to shelters coming up in the coming hurricane season. I noticed there's already a storm in the Caribbean. Does that have any impact or threat coming our way?
Not at this time, according to our natural hazards branch.
I was really interested in the web-based registration that the Red Cross has. It seems like that has a lot of potential to, particularly for us in the mental health realm, as a way to flag where there may be need for particular kinds of resources, that it should be easier to reach out. And of course, I'm sure people will have confidentiality concerns. Have you discussed that aspect of it?
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. So to your first part, it is absolutely going to be much more beneficial to us from the perspective of understanding what needs are, and then being able to pull in, thinking about mental health as an example, pull in those resources and make sure that individuals in shelters have the support they need. What I can say about confidentiality, this is actually going to be much more confidential than what our previous, paper-based forms were, because if you walked into a shelter and you were a shelter worker, in theory, you could just pull the box of registration forms out from under the registration desk and kind of thumb through them and see who was there. We don't want that. We understand that we need to protect our clients' confidentiality much better than that. And so this format and this web-based application will have numerous levels of access. So for an example, if we have a disaster and I am sitting in the state EOC for the Red Cross, working with Thomas and Christina and all of our other partners, I will be able to see that high level information, the number of folks in shelters, what needs they've articulated that they have, things like that, the basic information. I will not be able to choose, First Baptist Church, if that's a shelter location in X community. I won't be able to look at the individual names of the people in that shelter and what needs they have disclosed. Our individual shelter managers will be able to see that level of information, but we're going to ensure that there are several levels of access so that not everyone can see everything, because I don't need the detailed information at my level. I just need to see the big picture. And so we're working really hard to ensure that we are really protecting client confidentiality by limiting who actually has access to that level of information. Did that help, Andy?
Yeah. So and I'm just trying to think of this from the point of view of the standard and tailored plans who will provide some of those services, especially when there are, well, they may well be in shelters doing work that's kind of parallel to what we see Red Cross disaster mental health doing. But then particularly if there are higher level needs or hospitalization or some kind of specialized mental health service, it sounds like in general, they would be reaching out to the person at sort of at the, what do you call the headquarters level, or where there are relatively greater or needs. But then for individual information, they need to go through either, I guess, the shelter manager or more likely the Red Cross disaster mental health lead.
Right.
In a particular shelter.
Yes, that's absolutely right, Andy. So we'll still follow our same process for shelter managers, elevating what needs they have in a shelter. And then if we have the disaster mental health resources on the operation, then we will try and fill those for Red Cross managed shelters. But we know that, just like everyone else, it's very hard to maintain enough mental health workers from the Red Cross perspective. So we'll absolutely be reaching out and working with Christina for even Red Cross managed shelters where we know we have a significant mental health need to bring in those resources. And that's where we would share that information with Christina to say, hey, this is what we have, this is the request, this is what we're asking for, and work through the high level information. And then once somebody reports to that individual shelter, we would ask them to work directly with the mental health lead and the shelter manager on site at that location to dig in and really start to serve the clients that are in that shelter.
Great. Yeah. Makes sense.
Any other questions for us?
Not seeing them come in there. So maybe why don't we move on? Our next presentation will be Thomas Parrott talking about human services at North Carolina Emergency Management, along with Reina Cabrera, his partner, who've agreed to share with us where they are. You've shared a little bit about the situation that you're in, but we want to hear more about kind of what you see going forth with human services at North Carolina Emergency Management. And appreciate your willingness to share, especially at this time when obviously a fair amount is up in the air and you're trying to get things settled down. So take it away. Thanks.
Of course. Thank you, Andy.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Reina Cabrera. Give me a second to just share my screen. Okay, is everyone able to see the screen? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Okay. So I'm Reina Cabrera. I'm with the North Carolina Emergency Management Human Services Branch. And I, along with my partner, Thomas Parrott, will be sharing you a little more about what our branch covers. Thomas, feel free to jump in at any time as you see fit. Okay, so the SEOC positions will be the primary contacts with the state and nonprofit agencies. They will also be tasked with updating the state plans. And the field positions, which you see on the right side of the screen, will be tasked with providing trainings, aiding counties to improve sheltering abilities, providing in-person consultation during disasters to counties, and anything related to field planning. So as Thomas mentioned earlier, we are in the process of hiring a branch manager who will work out of the central branch by the end of this summer. And then other vacant positions for the 2 other human services planners will be posted and hopefully brought on board shortly after that. So the 2 other planner positions are currently being looked at to be placed in the Western and Eastern branches. Of course, anything could change between now and then, so that's just the tentative plan for our human services branch. So these are our partners that we work with daily to ensure that we are all prepared for activations and we continue the prep work for those likely incidents. As Thomas mentioned, we want to be prepared for all hazards, natural and man-made. There are also the primary liaisons that will be in the state EOC during an activation. So we have both nonprofit organizations and other government agencies that we partner with, along with multiple other organizations throughout the state of North Carolina. And we also look to partners in other states to share resources and identify stuff that could assist with our emergency management planning. So our goal is to overplan and pretty much be overly prepared for just about anything that could happen. We do this by building networks and fostering relationships with all stakeholders to ensure that we know who to contact when something happens and what we can expect from each one of our partners. We also try to build capacity at the local levels to do the same thing, network and build relationships. That way, the local levels could handle whatever disasters thrown their way before they reach out to the state level. So MassCare is pretty much taking care of everyone's basic needs. On the slide, you have the FEMA definition of what MassCare is. You have what our North Carolina Emergency Operations Plan says. But of course, ultimately, MassCare just means life safety. So in North Carolina, we most often associate shelters with tropical events, but we're prepared to shelter displaced populations in response to any natural or man-made disaster. So on this screen is pretty much just a common definition of what a shelter is. Okay, so they mentioned the sheltering overview tiered approach to sheltering. In North Carolina, sheltering starts at the local level and is driven by local needs. Each county has a plan for sheltering its own residents. Most people do not want to go far from home, even in a disaster, and keeping people close to home helps with recovery. But given that we're a coastal state, we know that not all counties can safely shelter within their own borders during some events, such as hurricanes or radiological events. So for guidance, we advise to get with your county's local county and seek out their sheltering plan. We also have the North Carolina Mass Sheltering Guide, which states that transportation is arranged by the evacuating county for those who are unable to use a personal vehicle, but the state can assist if requested by the local county. If host counties are overwhelmed, the state may open a state coordinated regional shelter. We may also open a state coordinated regional shelter post an event if the unaffected host counties need their spaces back to open schools or businesses and evacuated counties are unable to receive their residents yet. So the lead agencies, of course, is the Human Services Branch. We will be the lead agency for sheltering. We provide support for local sheltering operations and we coordinate state level sheltering activities. DSS is one of our main partners. They coordinate with the State Emergency Response Team and mass care support agencies to provide support and staff. We also have the American Red Cross, which plays a huge role in our sheltering operations, the National Guard, Public Health, and other divisions of the Department of Health and Human Services. They'll provide the wraparound services assistance. So these are the main services and functions that we coordinate for shelters to better serve everyone in the community. And this is made possible through our partnership with various agencies and organizations. And as Rebecca mentioned in the presentation earlier, these are pretty much life-sustaining support mechanisms that we ensure that every shelter has as a part of our planning, just so it better serves the entire community. So mass feeding provides access to food for a large number of people who are affected by natural or man-made disasters and events. The screen in front of you pretty much details what our mass feeding definition is. And as noted on the second bullet point, everything is handled at the local level. So when the local counties have reached their capacity and are overwhelmed, then they make a request to the state level and we assist through our mass feeding task force. When an event occurs that affects a county or multiple counties and it exceeds their capacity, the mass feeding task force assembles and provides them with up to 3 meals a day and 2 snacks. So the slide before you pretty much breaks down the 120 hours prior to landfall, what their capabilities are, their mobile kitchen, how many meals they're able to provide, how many kitchens they have in the state of North Carolina, their lead time, and then pretty much the organizations that assist with the mass feeding task force. Again, this is made possible through the partnership and relationships that we've established with one another and the plans that we put forth so that each agency and organization knows and understands the expectations and what is being expected of them is realistic. Okay, so we're just gonna go in a little into animals during disasters. So another part of what we do is coordinate the care that animals need during and after a disaster. Because any disaster that threatens humans, of course, usually threatens animals, whether they're livestock, wildlife, exotic animals, or even our pets. Pretty much what this entails is providing them with the basic needs for survival, which is water, shelter, food, and medical care, and or relocation to ensure that they end up going back to their owners. In case there's an infectious disease, it's to assist with controlling those, coordinating so that specific types of diseases are handled by the agencies that deal with handling whether they're livestock, wildlife, or exotic animals. The Pets Act of 2006 requires that all emergency plans address pet sheltering to encourage evacuations. This is done in a variety of ways as shown on the slide, with parallel shelters versus co-located shelters, the CAMET, which is the Companion Animal Mobile Equipment Trailer, or the CAST, which is the Companion Animal Sheltering Trailer. The slide also shows you the capacity for how many cages it holds if it's a large cage and a small cage. So this is so that when residents show up to the shelter with their pets, we're able to assist with providing their pets a place to lodge while their owners are in a shelter. So there's a difference between sheltering disaster populations. The first is what we've been talking about to this point. The second is that the state assists counties with providing shelter for at-risk populations. But as Thomas mentioned earlier, the state of North Carolina is broken up by counties, areas, and of course, the 3 regional coordinators. And so, or the 3, yes, regional coordinators, the West, the Central, and the East. So this map pretty much just shows you color-coded where you would be able to find a CAMET or a CAST based on the color code. So these are just a few of the many functions that we initiate, lead, and or support. Each one of these programs and activities involves our numerous partners, and the plans that you see in the first bullet point, of course, they're continuous working documents or living documents, and they evolve as, you know, groups change, people change, things change on a daily. And so we're consistently updating and ensuring that they're current. We always provide our partners with the plans that we update on or create to ensure that feedback and input is incorporated into our planning, just so that everyone's expectations and roles are realistic and attainable. As Thomas mentioned earlier, we are getting the ball rolling again and picking up where was left off. He mentioned that for a period of time, there was no one in the Human Services branch. And so we're working on getting everything back to the way it was prior to everyone leaving. So we appreciate all of our partners' assistance and support and partnership during this time. And I hope that this was an informative presentation for everyone, and that now you have a better idea of what we can assist with. If you have any questions or would like to partner with us in the future, feel free to contact us using the contact information on the slide. And I will give it back to Andy.
Thanks very much, Reina. I have a question for you. One of the, I think for many of us in this group, there has been a position in Human Services that was the disability integration specialist or coordinator. And I'm wondering how that, it doesn't look like that position is slated to return, or is it? And if not, how disability integration, how you think that will be handled? You know, who would be a contact person, or just kind of what in as much as you know now, kind of how that would be handled.
So, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thomas.
Sure. So based off what we've heard from Todd, is they're moving away from a sole person taking on their responsibility of the entirety of access and functional needs or disability integration. Instead, they want to divide that task amongst all the planners to ensure continuity within the program, so that if, say, one of us were to leave or get promoted, that function can still continue, along with being able to ensure that we have more people on those certain topics. For the time being, myself and Raina are currently handling all the functions of human services, sheltering, access and functional needs, pets, livestock, you name it. In the future, we're going to try to basically divide up as much as we can amongst everyone, so everyone basically becomes a expert within the topic, to ensure that if something were to happen, if someone wants to take leave, vacation, everything can still run smoothly. Brandon, do you have anything to add on top of that?
Just reiterating what Thomas mentioned. So we're pretty much aiming to cross-train into all the sections, just so, like Thomas mentioned, if someone was gone, we'd still be able to pick up where they left off with whatever topic or committee or program they were running. So I think we're taking the approach of getting into everything that human services covers. And then later, as we get situated and have the other planners pretty much section off who's going to be the expert at what specific program or topic, but still having everyone kept in the loop so that they can pick up where that person left off if they do go on leave.
Got it. Okay. I'm looking to see if anyone has put any other questions in the chat. I'm not seeing that. Really appreciate your coming out here and talking about what's going on with human services. Again, we know you're in a difficult position there, and appreciate your working with the partners. You've been really open and seeking input, and that's been helpful and reassuring to a lot of us. So thanks very much.
Andy, this is Robin. I have one comment, and really thanks to Rena and her team to underscore some of the things that they do that didn't get stressed. That food services, which is huge, they also have to take into account cultural issues. So if recently there was a disaster and cultural issues hadn't been taken into account, it was not in North Carolina, and they served sandwiches, and the people in the shelter were primarily Muslim, and they could not eat them because they weren't halal. And so it was wonderful that there was food, but if the culture of the people in the shelter aren't taken into account, it becomes an issue. So there's so much that she and her team do in front of and behind the scenes that is just incredible. So many thanks to what you do.
Agreed. Thanks. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next part of our presentation. We tend to focus heavily on mental health in sheltering. In this meeting, we thought we would branch out because we do feel we're going to be dealing with different kinds of events. Not that we're not going to be dealing with sheltering. I'm sure that's going to be coming back in a strong way, but we wanted to talk about sudden traumatic events where sheltering may not be the primary response or the primary operation in which disaster mental health will function. And so Robin Gurwitch, who just spoke from the Center for Child and Family Health at Duke, has agreed to talk with us about mental health issues in those situations. And Christine Malarkey, who's an emergency manager or emergency planner, I'm sorry, at North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, has agreed to talk with us about different models of response to those events. Robin, would you get us started?
Sure. Thanks, Andy. I think, let me get some PowerPoints over here. Can you see those?
Yeah, that's up. That's
Awesome.
that's
Great.
what you're sharing now.
So I want to spend just about 15 minutes talking a little bit about mental health considerations with disaster response. So we know that in a moment, in a heartbeat, everything changes, and it changes fast, and it really makes a life-changing impact. I did not start out at all planning to do disaster and traumatic event work. That was not anywhere in my long-range plans or anything. But I was a psychologist in Oklahoma City on April 19th, 1995, when the bombing happened about a mile from my work. And I was the person that was in charge of behavioral problems with child care centers. So given the number of children that were killed in the child care center, I got a call. I became a Red Cross volunteer on that day, and my life really changed. And I have been doing work in this field now since 95, about 50 to 60% of my day. And I think for communities, it really does change, whether it's a shelter event or whether it's a different type of event. It really changes communities, it changes families, it changes the landscape, and it changes how people think about those communities. When we even define disaster, we know that when we're talking about disasters, it's any mass trauma event, any public health emergency or crisis. And the overwhelming definition is that it's an event that basically has the capacity to overwhelm the resources in the community. And there's lots of different kinds. We've got natural ones, non-intentional tech injury kind of problems, and then intentional violence. And we are on a record pace already this year for mass shootings in the United States. I want to make an acknowledgement. I know that on May 11th, supposedly COVID was over. We're still having about 1,000 Americans die every day from COVID, and it has certainly changed the landscape for many of our families. There have been over 1 million deaths in the United States, and for children, over 200,000 children lost their primary or secondary caregiver. Most of those were under 13, and 65% of those deaths of caregivers were in marginalized minority populations. Huge increases that we've seen in the need for health and mental health, but not readily available, which cause mental health concerns. And again, marginalized populations are most impacted. And I will say that there was a recent report that just came out literally last month from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, talking about the impact of COVID and saying it has long-term mental health effects, particularly if someone has had a death or a long, lengthy hospitalization during COVID. It puts them at increased risk for health and mental health problems. So it didn't just get to turn the calendar. And the pandemic really intersected with the social justice movement, with a rise in racism, anti-Semitism, and the needs, particularly for mental health, then the availability of services are quite reduced. When we think about what do we know about disasters? When there is a disaster, no matter what kind it is, there can be minimal inconvenience sometimes. Oops, I don't know why it went to total destruction. The good news is most people are resilient. Very few develop psychiatric disorders, but it peaks in the first year. Some can develop delayed PTSD, but for the most part, most folks do better. And even though most people are pretty resilient, being able to adapt to the adversity that they face, even in some of the most challenging situations like 9/11, that doesn't mean that they're not distressed. People get distressed, and that doesn't mean because we know most people do better that we don't do anything. We think the reason most people do better is because what we do in the immediate aftermath of these type of events. And to recognize that distress, extreme distress, doesn't equal psychopathology. So we need to be careful about equating the two and looking at what is a diagnosis. Most people should not be given a diagnosis. When we look at what we should do, we hold these 5 principles in mind when we think about disasters of any kind, whether it is, post mass violence or post hurricane. Thinking about these 5 principles, thinking about safety. Are people safe from what is around them? Are they in a safe space? Have they been, or all the things that can cause harm out of their way? How do we increase a sense of calm for survivors? Thinking about connectedness. What does that look like? How do we make sure that no one is really alone? And building up a sense of self-efficacy, but also efficacy for the community in which this took place. And then I think one of the most important principles is hope, that part of our job is to really instill that sense of hope that yes, this horrific tragedy happened. How do we continue to grieve if there's been loss of life? And how do we continue to heal? And then how do we also recover? I want to talk about psychological first aid. That's pretty much the recommended go-to in the aftermath of any kind of mass event in a community. And so we think about PFA. PFA is really responding to the needs of people because of the situation they find themselves in. There are multiple models of psych first aid out there. The one that I spend most of my time training and using is a model of PFA that was developed by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and the National Center for PTSD. It is a modular approach, as are almost all PFA models, to assist everybody across the age span in the immediate aftermath of these events. It is evidence informed. It includes information gathering. It provides concrete examples of what we can do. PFA uses a developmental framework. There are cultural factors that need to be considered that are incorporated with PFA training. And there are wonderful handouts that can be available to survivors for them in the moment, but also down the road when they really have the brainwidth to take a look. PFA is emotional support. It is information and education. How do we help address the problems that are most present for that survivor? How do we help them think about practical and adaptive ways of coping? And if we see huge mental health problems, how do we make sure that people get the help they need? There are 8 core principles in PFA, from contact and engagement, safety and comfort, making sure that people have what they need no matter the situation. Stabilization is often not needed. It's very rare for people that are truly dissociated from what is happening around them to bring them back to the moment. Gathering information, so we help them prioritize and identify what is most critical in the moment. Offering practical assistance, connecting with social supports, talking about coping in each of these modules has information of what we can do to support survivors. This is not where we have survivors go into the details of what they went through. That is not the case. We're gathering basic information so we can best support and help. If they want to find someone that they can talk to about their detailed experiences, then we would hook them up with those services. PFA takes place in the immediate days to weeks following a disaster or mass violence events or any kind of traumatic event. PFA is really your go-to. Then we think about what happens in the months that are following. And so we think about this as a tier 2. Think of PFA as a universal or a tier 1 approach, whereas skills for psychological recovery, or SPR, is a tier 2. And again, it's a modular intervention to manage any ongoing distress. It can be integrated into mental health services. SPR can be delivered with 1 contact to maybe 5 contacts. But we work to encourage, let me check and see, let's try something, let's see how it goes, and let me check back in with you. It was created again by NCTSN and the National Center for PTSD across the age span and in a variety of settings. It is a series of skills that can be tailored. And so every SPR component, and you see these components, the 6 core components for SPR: information gathering, problem solving, positive activities, managing reactions, helpful thinking, and social support. Every component, when we use a component, we provide a rationale to the survivor of why. We talk about the steps to being able to implement this component, and there's never more than 4 steps, and it has concrete examples that can resonate with the survivor to make sure that they can use it. So SPR is more that tier 2 that can be used. And then a new one that you may not be familiar with is called Child-Adult Relationship Enhancement, or strengthening relationships and improving behaviors. CARE came from therapists that said, you know what, we need something that for people that don't have the need for a psychologist, social worker, counselor, that don't need intensive mental health treatment, that tier 3, but need some help, some support. It is trauma-informed and culturally sensitive, and it is for children between the ages of 2 and 18. It is delivered by absolutely any, and when I say any, I mean any adult that interacts with children this age, and it is based on strong evidence-based programs. CARE is 2 parts. It works to enhance relationships, because we know that through relationships, through those connections, that is the one protective factor that comes through in disaster and mass violence, that having that relationship matters, and that can reduce some mild to moderate behavior problems. And the second part of CARE training includes how do we give better instructions, so even when stressed, children and teens are more likely to comply with what we need them to do, so that it can help families. It can help the children, the teenagers in whatever setting they are in. So CARE has had several adaptations for this presentation, really thinking about the CARE adaptation that is specific for disasters and mass violence or terrorism, called Respond with CARE, and how have we adapted CARE to be used in the immediate aftermath. So CARE can be integrated into PFA, into SPR, and into Tier 3 interventions as well. CARE training is relatively short. It takes anywhere from 4 to 6 hours to go through a CARE training. And as soon as you finish a CARE training, you can use the skills yourself. You will have all the materials you need to teach it to someone else one-on-one. So if I train somebody in food services, they can teach somebody else in food services, or they can teach a family member or someone else to use the same skills. So again, we are using it through our New Day program, which is funded by SAMHSA and is part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And then finally, I want to just take a minute to say that if you do this work, to recognize that it takes a toll on us. It is not easy work by any stretch of the imagination, no matter what role you have in the aftermath of a disaster or mass violence or a community-wide event. It takes a toll on us. And so self-care has become so much more important than we ever realized before. And it's really not just self-care, because self-care seems to put the onus on us to make sure we're taking care of ourselves. It really needs to go beyond how do we take care of ourselves to the idea of organizational wellness. What is the organization doing to make sure that the people in their workforce are being taken care of? And there's a new framework for self-care that the NCTSN recently put out. These are all free resources. Everything that the NCTSN does is free. So whether it's PFA or SPR or CARE training or information on PRN, the Pause, Reset, and Nourish model for self-care, you can find information on the website. But we are partnering quite a bit in the aftermath of large-scale disasters and mass violence. And we think that self-care needs to be part and parcel of it. I wish I could tell you that's the North Carolina beaches. That's my happy place on the Gulf Coast. I grew up in Alabama, so those are my beaches. But anytime I can get to a beach, that is my big time self-care place. But I thank you. I think I got it in within my 15 minutes, and I appreciate your time and attention.
Thanks very much, Robin. Could you stick a contact email in the chat, people to contact you
Absolutely.
about training and those various things?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to move quickly on to Christine, because we are getting a little behind and want to make sure we get it all in there. Christine, thanks for
Hey, good
joining us.
morning. Good morning.
Christine Malarkey.
Yes. All right. Trying to get my screen ready to go here. Are you guys able to see the slideshow?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to try very, very quickly to boil down a very complex topic of family assistance centers. And basically the who I would call the experts in this field. We've got a number of them, but when I look for information and expertise and knowledge and experience in this area, I look predominantly to the National Transportation Safety Board, as well as the FBI and some folks that have dealt with massive incidents. So the NTSB was mandated through legislative action to create guidance and requirements for transportation carriers to care for the victims and the families after a major incident. But I'm not going to boil too much into that. I'm just going to kind of go through a few things real quickly here. So while I could have many pages listing all of the mass fatality incidents of reference, there's just a couple that I'm going to highlight on in this discussion really quickly, in part because they have something to do with lessons learned, or things that we would want to replicate or learn from, and the field has adapted and adopted differently afterwards. So Asiana, you see listed here, is the airplane that, if you remember, in 2013 essentially cartwheeled over the wall at the landing strip to San Francisco Airport. And that was a very much studied accident, in part because of the high rate of survivability. The injuries were a wide range. Many of them were more minor as opposed to severe. There were some very severe, but one of the really interesting things taken from this incident was the issue of victim accounting. And as a result of that, NTSB really worked hard to kind of work with hospital systems and engage in healthcare providers to work with them on sharing information about what victims they have in their care. Because victim accounting after this incident was extremely complicated, as the patients were dispersed to, I believe, over 20 hospitals and emergency rooms across the San Francisco region. Sandy Hook, obviously, we remember that tragedy. One of the pieces that is often talked about that is the reunification that happened at the fire station close to the school. When the incident happened, to try to divert the families from rushing to the school, they were directed to go to the firehouse, which is a great answer. You don't want everybody rushing to the site of the incident because you need that access held for first responders and the ability to transport patients and survivors. But one of the tragedies that happened in this response was in part that you had about 26 families that sat at the firehouse all day watching the reunification of the other families whose children survived and were not injured. And so they had watched those reunifications take place all day, and they sat there many hours. And then they were advised at the end, hey, your kids aren't coming out. They didn't make it. And so that was a really difficult way that incident was handled. And certainly not saying this to criticize anybody. They were obviously doing the very best that they could with what they had in place. But this incident really helped stress to us the need for having a separate process for where the survivors are placed versus where the families and those who are seeking them are held, and then where the reunifications take place. So they're really, when an incident happens, we want to try to see those three locations set up very quickly. And we'll talk about that a little bit here. Chattanooga bus crash, I'll just share on this really quickly. One of the things that helped the families to reconnect with their students who were injured but not deceased was that the hospital ED was really creative and pulled out a Polaroid camera very quickly, and they snapped pictures of kids in ways that were somewhat identifying, so that the parent who had put them on the bus that morning would recognize, yep, that's my child, that's what they were wearing, or that's their backpack, that's their things, And so that really helped them with their reunification process. And so some of kind of what we're taking from these is the things that are happening that worked well. Obviously, we've seen a couple of incidents with parades in the last few years, and these two I'm actually personally somewhat familiar with. I went to college in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and I went to high school just outside of Highland Park, Illinois. So the parade incidents were really unique because talking about the vast number of people impacted and the very broad, what's called an open population, essentially, that had to sort of be sorted through to try to identify survivors and injured and all of those folks. Mass fatality we define as any incident that exceeds what the capacity is that can be handled locally. So it's possible to have a motor vehicle accident that's a mass fatality. If you ever think of those passenger vans that have 12 to 15 people on them, and they get involved in a major wreck without survivors, that can become a mass fatality for a community. All across North Carolina, we have shortage of morgue space, shortage and strains on our medical examiner system. And so it's very easy for an incident to be escalated as a mass fatality. What changes is what the need in the response is. You can have a mass fatality incident and not have a need for a family assistance center, or not have a need for reunification services, and those kinds of things. So looking at the incident according to how it happens and what is needed sort of drives some of our next key steps. And I know I'm flying through this, so I apologize. This is a very condensed picture of some of the things that happen in an incident, right? So our incident happens and boom, everybody's carrying cell phone, whether they're involved, whether they're passing by, whether it's on a tarmac at an airport and somebody else is inside the airport and sees that plane get hit or catch fire or whatever the case may be, or they're driving by the highway and they see something happen, an accident on the other side. Everybody's taking pictures, everybody's reporting to social media, everybody is a reporter nowadays. And so the publicity around incidents happens instantaneously. Initially, one of the first things to do is kind of that triage process, right? So the injured get sent for medical, those who survived, we want to get them collected, we want to get them gathered. And this applies not only to a transportation accident, but also to acts of violence. So whether it happens in the mall or a shopping center or a school, we want to get those survivors gathered and get them to a safe place. And usually we want to remove them from that incident scene so that they can be safe, they can be checked out, and they can be checked for any secondary injury or delayed trauma response that might require medical attention. Very quickly, their families and friends are going to be looking for them. And so we need to have a place to send them to, and we had to have a place in the middle where we can reunite those two groups. Ideally, we're reuniting them together, not in front of everybody else. And so we can pull those groups together and identify them. In addition, when this whole thing is happening, we've got scene security, they establish unified command, all of the first responder agencies have to get together and get control of things. The Emergency Operations Center is opened. It takes about a day or more to get to a place where you can open what's called a Family Assistance Center. The Family Assistance Center is what you open to really provide quality service and care to those families. We are trying to address sort of four main categories of things that people need right after a major incident in which there is injury or loss of life. So notification of involvement, that's saying, hey, we believe your loved one is involved. We don't know the details or the extent of their condition, but we believe your loved one is involved, and here is where to go to get more information. Schools are now required to notify families if there's an incident on campus. Airlines and transportation providers are required to notify families if something has happened to a vehicle in transit. So there's methods and mechanisms for this. Victim accounting. People want to know, where is my loved one? Where are they? Where can I find them? How can I get to them? Do I go to the hospital? Do I go to this place? So initially we want to direct them to a friends and relatives center. That's the first place that we open. We just want to make sure that we have a place to gather those families together, to give them information, and to try to support them in what the start of what could be a very difficult process. How do they get informed? How do they get access? Not everybody's going to always want to go to a physical location. So having ways for people to become informed either through a hotline or, you know, a contact piece. Ideally, you need somebody talking to them. You don't want to just say, okay, we'll send you an email with updates, because that will never get out fast enough. That will never get to them in timely manner. There needs to be an opportunity for dialogue. So if they are further away, they can't get to the location, giving them a phone number to call into for information or to access briefings and things like that. And then the other thing too that we see often is when people have a major loss like that, they want their loved ones' belongings, the things that were with them, that they last had in their possession before this traumatic incident happened. Going to try to go really quickly through some of this. So we see that the immediate response, we gather the friends and family, we gather the survivors, we reunite who we can, and then we have families that are left that we have to find their loved ones and figure out what are we doing. So that initial friends and relatives center, the purpose of it is protection and privacy. It's intended to give them a place to be together and to be safe, but we're not requiring them to stay there. We don't lock anybody in. We don't, you know, say you have to be here. It's just a place to kind of come and be together. It's also a place where we want to make sure that's where information is being shared first. So updates from the incident site, lists of patients who were transported to hospitals, things like that, that gets updated and briefed there first to families. That's our first place of information sharing and ensuring that we are doing the best that we can to inform those families and give them some support during those early hours. We also use it as an opportunity to gather information from the families. So who are they looking for? What can they tell us about the description of that loved one? What would their loved one be wearing or doing or trying to do in that time? And so that's an opportunity where we start first building that profile of who are we looking for when we're trying to account for the victims. It's very bare bones because it's the initial place that we go to. But we do want to try to have crisis counseling available so much as it is possible, recognizing that the greater push for resources will come when we establish the Family Assistance Center. Sorry, I'm trying to fly through really quickly. So reunification, we talked about a little bit. We talked about it being a separate location. We use it to reconnect families and survivors. We want it to be out of sight of media and the public eye, give them some privacy, give them some time together. After that is done and we are at the point of assisting the families whose loved ones were either severely injured or did not survive, then we're trying to open up a Family Assistance Center. That's where more in-depth interviews happen with the families to try to gather information that will be helpful for the forensics and the pathologist folks to try and identify their victims. They have done these Family Assistance Centers in a variety of ways. There's many different models that have been utilized. In Newtown, Connecticut, what they did was they sent those families home. They didn't pull them all together in one center. They didn't feel that that would be useful or helpful. So they sent them home and each family was assigned a liaison that was with them at all times. And that happened to, I believe, be state police in Connecticut. And that those families grew very close to those liaisons. And they were kind of the conduit for information, making sure that those families' needs were getting met. If they needed help getting in contact with somebody or anything like that, that was done through that liaison. Other times we try to pull people together, give them one place to go to get briefings, to be informed, and sort of kind of provide some care for that group. It can be a wide variety of services that are provided in a family assistance center, kind of similar to how we see in shelters. The nature of who is there, who is the customer, dictates what is provided. The cultural sensitivities and all of those things come into play, and making sure that what is at the Family Assistance Center is tailored to the group that is there, and needing that support. All information is briefed out of the Family Assistance Center once that is established. For families with survivors who are in hospitals, oftentimes they are briefed through a conference bridge or a secure conference line, to try to provide them the same information and access to resources. But their needs may be very different than the needs of the families of the decedents. So those are some things that we see kind of go on. We always want to make sure that there's accessibility taken into account, security. There's oftentimes a badging or identification system. The families tend to self-identify. They will identify if somebody is there that should not be there. We don't define who a family member is. The families will define that for themselves. And the media gets briefed, but they get briefed separately and after the families have been briefed. So we understand the media has a news cycle and timelines and deadlines for that. But the first and most important customer is those families. Get through a couple other things. The Family Assistance Center has its own coordination cell that's located within the facility, so that those who are coordinating and organizing in that aspect of the response are truly right there and they're connected to that operation. You don't want to coordinate a Family Assistance Center out of an EOC or another remote location. You really want to be plugged in, so that you can see, like, okay, nobody ate lunch today. What did we serve? Was that culturally appropriate? Was that dietary appropriate? One of the things, I'll just share a really quick story, and then I know, Andy, I'm tight on time. When they had the Asiana incident, they were serving a lot of Mexican and American food, but a lot of the passengers and survivors and their family members were Asian, and so their diet was typically rice and vegetables and much lighter dishes. They started seeing a number of the people go back to the hospitals. The hospitals were saying, hey, we've got a bunch of your people here and they're complaining of gastric problems. What are you doing? And they realized all of a sudden that the diet that had been prepared by the hotel, very well intentioned, was not the appropriate diet for the customers that they were taking care of. So little adjustments like that are important, and that's why each Family Assistance Center needs to be coordinated with a team that's there on site, on the ground, and able to adapt to those needs day to day. So that was like a super short overview, and I apologize, but trying to get into some of this, and you'll clearly see why we need y'all's help and presence in these centers.
Thank you, Christine. I think the brevity of it is more on us than on you, and appreciate the efforts you put into making it brief. So we're going to take a quick break now. It's going to be literally a 5-minute break. So we'll come back and start at 10:51. And we'll have the panel discussion then. Okay, well, I want to start by thanking Christine and Robin for their incredibly fascinating presentations. There was a lot to jam into a 15-minute, and you did a nice job of it, and it was really interesting. So now I think we have a chance to explore some of those things a little more in the panel discussion, and with Robin and Christine and Sarah Hartz and Carlisle Johnson will join the discussion. I'm sure they have experiences they may wish to add. And Christina Bowman will moderate. Take it away, Christina.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you again to Robin Gurwitch and Christine Malarkey for really great presentations, echoing what Andy did. I know it was a bit of a task to ask you to cover such important topics in a very limited time frame, but we did want to have time to do a few different activities throughout today's meeting. And so thank you also to Sarah Hartz from Trillium and Carlisle Johnson from Alliance in joining us for this portion of this panel, sort of a live discussion that we're going to have over the next 14-15 minutes. And before launching into other questions, I guess I'd like to start with posing a question to Sarah and Carlisle, just to kick things off and ask you first, each of you, Carlisle and Sarah, if you have any immediate thoughts or questions related to the presentations by Robin or Christine that you'd like to put forth to them.
Hi, everyone. I can say I attended Robin's PFA training, and I do recommend that for everyone. It was a really great compliment for anyone that's worked on the Hope for NC grant with that crisis counseling program, just to kind of reiterate some of the goals of that training. And I thought it was really great with Christine, and then earlier with North Carolina Emergency Management, sort of bringing up the importance of connecting locally. That's something that Trillium has seen a lot of success with. That's how we were able to learn about the work that Christine Malarkey does, because we got an invitation to a Dare County event to learn about these family assistance centers. And I'll kind of stop there.
Great. Carlisle, do you have anything to add or any questions or comments that come to mind as we move forward?
No, I enjoyed both presentations, and I'm still thinking about it. I think it may be, as we discuss some of the other questions, that I may have some other thoughts.
Okay, well, let's dive right in then. So this is really for anyone. We know there's a fine line between forcing people to talk about their feelings of trauma and helping someone to feel comfortable enough to share those feelings. So what do you think? How do you most effectively approach people who are coping with trauma?
I'll be happy to start that. They are probably at their absolute most vulnerable. This is not a time to have them completely open up and deal with what is very raw in detail, because then what? Where do you leave them? And that's counterproductive in so many ways. So the best that we can recommend is that how do we approach them so that we are respectful, that really what we are doing is to listen to what they need, see if we can help set up some ways to meet those immediate needs, whether it's food, shelter, clothing, whether it is connecting with family members, whether it is to know where to go for information, or even just how information is going to be relayed to them, and then to give them some ideas around coping for the immediate time, but asking them to really tell you about what happened, unless you're in a very unique group, such as first responders. That is so contraindicated to the point of, please do not do that.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Hey, Robin, I just want to echo that. And one of the things that I try to stress when we do have the Family Assistance Center workshops and discussions is to talk about, like, this is not a place for evangelism. This is not a place for everybody to get their hands on these families and the survivors to ask them questions and things like that. That anytime that information is gathered or collected, it has to serve a purpose. It has to be asked once. It has to be documented well. And it has to be respected, so that we're not asking people to account in hopes that, you know, there's a transfer of information of what's gathered at the Family Reception Center is taken to the Family Assistance Center, and then they build the file from there.
Yeah. And I would echo, this is not a time to pass out business cards. This is not a time to recruit clients. This is truly offering emotional support and finding out what they need in the moment.
Thank you. Carlisle, I understand that back in 2019, when there's the gas explosion that took place in downtown Durham, that Alliance did put forth some different kinds of response, activities. Could you share just in a couple of minutes a little bit about what was done and sort of any maybe some successes or challenges you might have faced in that event?
Yeah, we've actually had 2 experiences that we've responded to that have been out of the usual ones that we prepared for. So, we're prepared for the staffing of shelters and, things with natural disasters, but we've had both a gas explosion and a shooting incident where we found there's some things that were different. One is that there's no place where people go. There's no sheltering involved. So you're really working with a community that's affected. Although with the gas explosion, there was definitely an area that was most affected. And this is basically, 2 buildings were destroyed. It was felt for miles. It was such a. I found it interesting. I was just kind of reading up on remembering what happened. There were people who were trapped in their cars because their airbags went off. It was that much of an explosion. And so one of the things we did was, first of all, reach out to see who else is responding to this, because I think sometimes there's a diffusion of responsibility where you're not sure, is that something that Alliance handles? Is the city of Durham handling it? The county of Durham, who is involved in the response? But then we did coordinate with others to make sure that we were staying in our lane, but also did a lot of work just walking around, talking to people. We had staff who went out and were distributing flyers, information about coping skills, things like that. And then I think what I heard from those who actually were out talking to people is that was probably the most welcomed support, is just knowing that there were people that you could talk to, and offering to be someone who could listen and address any of the issues that may have come up. We did have a public event that was available. We had very low turnout, but we were glad we did it. We actually reached out to Center for Child and Family Health, and so we were delighted to have some experts in traumatic stress response that were able to help with that. I think one learning for us is just trying to understand who the experts are in the event that something like this comes up, and who would you turn to, and also think of some of the I've heard from the presentation, how to make sure you're not doing harm. How do you first do this, respond in an appropriate way that's not making it worse?
Thank you for that response and sharing what you all did. Sarah, can you share about any actions that Trillium may have done in the recent, few years for these like non-hurricane or no notice events, these sudden events? An example that I think of on my head, but you might have something different, but I thought I'd recalled within 1 to 2 years ago, there was that small plane crash that took place, and I think there was a lot of students on board. I thought I I heard Trillium did something. So if you could speak on that or another example and share what something you all have done.
So, a lot of our systems were initiated from hurricane response. So, after Florence, Trillium did identify the need to hire sort of 2 full-time managers to cover the 28 counties. And if there are incidents, that was a crash that did involve, I believe, quite a few high school students that were all at the same school. And so the regional director of that area, along with, I believe, Saritha, she's on this call, did the outreach to connect with those individuals and that emergency manager to see what kind of resources they needed and just provide that assistance if it was needed. So a lot of times that's what we see, and kind of how we saw with that Hope for NC grant. It's kind of helpful for people to know that it's there in case they need it. And then a lot of times we'll involve, I believe in that area is integrated family services that provides CISM, critical incident, stress management resources also for any of the first responders or anybody else on that team.
Great, thank you. Okay, now we've just got about 4 minutes left, 3 minutes left. So the last question I'll pose back to Robin and Christine, if each of you could give a thought in about a minute or so. But I know we didn't give you much time to present today. So if you have one final sort of thought or comment on the topics that you presented on that you would like to share with the group, we'd greatly appreciate it. And sorry again for the abbreviated time to do so.
Christine, you can go.
Okay. I think for me, I put it in the chat earlier, but there is a very informative video that the FBI put together. It's about 45 minutes long, and it talks with families who lost loved ones through traumatic incidents, everything from Columbine to Virginia Tech and other things in between. And that I put the link to it. It's a YouTube video. It's very powerful. It's kind of intense. But I do think that it is worth watching because it is very informative about the notification process and some of what those families went through.
Yeah, I will say that we recently completed a project that was funded by the Department of Justice, where we held focus groups and interviews with survivors and responders to 5 mass violence school shootings and 5 mass violence community. So Pulse, Sandy Hook, everything in between. It finished before the pandemic, so we didn't have Uvalde and Nashville and those, but to gather information, sort of lessons learned to report back to DOJ, including what the impact on social media was on communities. And yeah, I wish things were different, because most of the families, 201, said it was the waiting for the official notice when they already knew. That was so challenging. But the flip side from law enforcement, if you don't follow the legal steps, then if there is any responsibility or any trials or those kinds of things, it can be completely undermined. So it's a really difficult dance. And I will say, we think about the immediate aftermath. We think about needing mental health. We think about the months and a year after that need support and those anniversaries. But I will tell you, if it is a man-made disaster and there is legal proceedings, the need for mental health at those legal proceedings and with those families around legal proceedings, it's happening right now with the Pittsburgh synagogue shootings. There are many, Oklahoma City, definitely we had people in the courtrooms. So all of these, the need for mental health providers that are versed in disaster mental health and can work in shelters, can work in family assistance centers, that can work in sort of outside the box of traditional mental health, are so critical. So I would encourage everybody that's involved in the mental health world to get the training so that, God forbid, something happens, you can help stand up, because there's never enough. And you can say no. You can say no 800 times and they will call you the 801st. So it is okay. As long as you are on their list, then you can look and see, is this a good time for you? And I appreciate the opportunity. I apologize. I am multitasking. That's one of the things I love about virtual world, but I am leading a training right now. So I am going to run. If you need anything about the trainings that we provide for free, please reach out and I can let you know. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Robin. And I do like how she said, hey, you can always take the training. It doesn't mean you're signing in blood, your commitment, that it just means you can maybe get on the rosters. And hey, maybe there's a time where you or your providers will be able to stand up. But as we mentioned, running a few minutes behind, so I'm going to pass it back to you, Andy. Thanks to Sarah, Christine, and Carlisle for taking part in that short discussion. And I think we can move along.
Okay. Now we're going to, Karen's going to assign each of us to a breakout group. This will give everyone in the meeting a chance to process some of these approaches to sudden traumatic events. The questions we'd like you to brainstorm are, I hope, being shared on the screen now. What models of response are most promising for these sudden traumatic events? And what are some of the challenges to successfully implementing these approaches? Feel free to take notes if you wish, but we're not going to ask you to designate a note taker. We really want you to just focus on brainstorming and problem solving. And then as a follow-up, we'll move directly from the breakout group to having a Jamboard where we will be able to process the ideas, well, raised in the breakout groups, but that we've been talking about for the last hour, as well as new ideas that you might not have shared yet. So Karen, go ahead and send us to the groups. Okay, let's see. We're going to Christina Ballman is going to help us process all this information from the presentations, from the panel discussion, and from the breakout groups, and any new ideas you have. Go ahead, Christina.
Thanks. As we have on the agenda, we're going to have sort of, trying to play with new ways to get engagement from the group. So some of you may have used this sort of Jamboard tool before. I have in a few different meetings, or I've been in attendance of a meeting that used it, and it seems like people like it. So hopefully we like it here, but I'm going to share my screen and show you what I'm talking about. So this is what we've got. This is a place where basically from your computer, I'm going to put a link in the chat in just a minute, but I just want to show you this real quick first. This is our topic, and this is sort of a little whiteboard that we can all access and put our thoughts down. So again, I'm talking about our responses specific to sudden traumatic events. And I thought, based on your discussions or perhaps your own thoughts from the presentations and panel, you could put down any sort of challenges that you've encountered or you might anticipate in how to respond to sudden traumatic events, as well as any solutions to those challenges or just general successes you've had. And what you can do over here on the left-hand side, there are some tools. What you want to do is this little box here with some lines on it that represents a sticky note. So what you do is you want to put a comment in here. You could say, okay, solution maybe is, working with faith leaders as an example. And I want this to be pink. I'm going to save that, and it's going to post. So I'm canceling and closing that. And I can move this to where I want. I can make it really big, really small. As people put their things in, you may want to, move them around. So everyone has the ability to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat now, if you'll bear with me. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to call out. But in the meantime, if you could click on that comment, on that link that I put in, and you could start putting in, I see people up here are starting to fill it. Of course, I'm going to keep my screen shared. For some reason, someone's not able to access that link for any reason, you can still see it. So on your screen, you may need to open, a different box so you can actually play with it and put your things in. If the screen share is distracting, I can stop the share, but and I'm going to put in a comment that someone in my group made that I thought was really good, just to get things rolling a little bit. And we're going to do this. We're going to go to about 11:35. Maybe we'll wrap up at about 5 minutes, 11:33, and we can just make a couple of quick comments on some of the things that you guys have put in here. some of the things I see posted. I'm not sure if they're being put on the right side or not, but it appears that some people are indicating that some challenges could be, you know, limited trained staff. It's a challenge to prepare for the unknown. More trauma-informed care would be good for personnel who work at schools, churches, places that, and sadly, we sometimes see mass shootings occur, as sometimes they may be the first ones to help their congregation or students. You know, challenge and encouraging people to seek that mental health support, and to link that, someone kind of said there's that honeymoon phase of, you know, the initial response some may have is I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. Let's see, limited resources for referral in the rural areas, that's a challenge, as well as diffusion of responsibility for response, and limited time for sites for adequate processing. Some strengths I'm seeing are, strengths, solutions, successes, etc. Tabletop utilization of tabletop exercises, understanding there's a need. A solution is to some issues could be that, you know, maybe building in and planning the need to be flexible and how to do that, having that all hazards approach planning, instead of, you know, really limited to one specific type of event or another. Definitely important to limit self-deployment or self-dispatching to incidents, as often there's protocols in place, and jurisdictional issues as well. Okay, I see. I was just trying to understand these abbreviations. Include behavioral health support in community meetings that are not just for mental health. So that's good. Integrating the behavioral health support into a variety of the networks and meetings that we attend. May have an opportunity for training, Family Assistance Center 101 workshop. I'd certainly like to know more about that. If whoever posted that, if that is an actual upcoming opportunity, I don't know, via terms or something else, but if someone could put a little more info in the chat, that would be awesome. Let's see, more successes. Find planned exercises and extend them to the part of reunification and victim accounting, active shooter, airport, etc. Ongoing long-term connections to communities. I just added, I don't know much about this, but someone in my group talked about an approach utilizing, so perhaps to model, but motivational interviewing techniques when interacting with folks. So I added that. Okay, and Christine, one of our presenters, put into the chat that they can deliver family assistance workshops to communities or regions. I think they would work with emergency management to get those set up. And it would probably be a 2-day training, but you can reach out to her if that's something you're interested in pursuing, or maybe like working with some of your counties to see if this is something that they would be interested in working with, and, you know, with you and them and Christine. But her email is there. Sounds like a great opportunity. And then another challenge someone posted could be the linking of all the various services, agencies, to be really on the same page during a crisis or an emergency. All right, and when we're in our last couple of minutes here, to go ahead and put final thoughts on, and I've just been sort of reading these out for anyone who maybe is on the phone or something, but Andy, do you have any other thoughts or comments based on what you see here?
Just that, we should send this out. We'll collect these and send these comments out to everyone as an email. And there are a couple of other things we'll do as well. Robin's contact information for training, the video on family assistance centers, I think by the FBI, that Christine Malarkey gave us in the chat. We'll get all of that out to everyone on this meeting.
Great. Well, it looks like I think people have sort of gotten all of their ideas out that they wanted to share. I don't see any more coming through, but like you said, we can put these in a document, or I might be able to, screen share this with you, Andy, to share out with those other things. But otherwise, I think we can go ahead and move on to our next agenda item.
Okay, so Roxanne Taylor's going to share with us some update on Red Cross disaster mental health for the coming year. Roxanne?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes.
Great. All right, let me share my screen. Oops. Well, I lost that, but I won't waste your time. Within the American Red Cross, we currently have 48 licensed mental health professionals between Eastern North Carolina and Greater Carolinas regions. And our plans for the hurricane evacuation centers before landfall would be congregate shelters. Some are fully Red Cross managed, some are partner managed with Red Cross support, with staff and supplies. And then some shelters may be completely independent with no Red Cross involvement. Our disaster mental health coverage could be on-site or someone itinerating various shelters, or virtual with contact with the shelter staff, depending on our volunteer availability. Post-landfall shelters seem to most often be non-congregate shelters in contracted hotels. And again, our coverage there will depend on the availability of our staff. The challenge for congregate shelters has been privacy for clients, and especially those with special needs that might need some more private areas. The challenges that we've seen in recent responses for the non-congregate shelters would be the isolation of clients when they go into their rooms. They're off our radar. We don't see them. We don't hear them. We're not able to talk with them or even access them when we get requests to actually talk with them. The other challenge has been hotels evicting clients for disobeying their rules, damaging property, bringing in unregistered guests, leaving children unsupervised in hotel rooms. And then the challenges for all shelters has been accessing mobile crisis response before an emergency occurs. In some areas we've deployed to outside of North Carolina, we've not been able to find any mobile crisis response system. We've not been able to get connections to local resources that we might refer to. And then, of course, staffing the shelters with people with varying availability. So we definitely need our partners. I know my biggest challenge in Arkansas after the tornado was 55 hotels spread over a 2.5 hour radius with 3 or 4 mental health workers deployed in there on the ground, and then several available virtually to make phone calls to the clients. And we hope to get a better handle on that here. We're very fortunate to have our partnership relationships with the various state agencies, the MCOs. The conversations are already happening, planning, and the connections that we all agree we're in much better shape here than some other areas that we have been. We have a specialty response teams, the integrated care condolence teams that not only include disaster mental health, but health services, spiritual care, and recovery to work with the families of deceased, hospitalized, and missing persons. And we have found some families may deal with all 3 of these issues at once. We also have mass casualty incident response teams that will include family reunification, which is a key piece in the beginning so that people can then connect with their loved ones. Our upcoming plans are a disaster mental health summit in Fort Fisher on June 17th and 18th for Red Cross members throughout the state. And we also aim to develop some written crisis response protocols for all shelters and service sites that would include mobile crisis response team numbers, non-emergency police numbers, and even 911 dispatchers if needed. We realize a lot of people think that we're not supposed to ask for outside help, but if you go back to basic psychological first aid, as in regular first aid, if there is an immediate safety concern, you can call 911. We also want to clarify the scope of practice for disaster mental health, since what we do is psychological triage and connecting people to resources for ongoing mental health needs, or connecting to the local resources for crisis intervention, ongoing grief support, and helping people to get the assistance and the resources that they need. That's all I have, Andy.
All right, thank you. And thanks for doing this. This is a really busy time for Roxanne, and it was great of her to take this time out to join us. And I am now going to share some information on a new training that we've developed that the Disaster Behavioral Health Committee has developed. And let's see. So, and there we go. And I think I can do this in about 5 minutes. So the Behavioral Health Committee, Disaster Behavioral Health Committee, has just completed an just-in-time training designed to prepare licensed professionals to provide disaster behavioral support in disaster operations. We developed the training with providers contracting with or working for the standard and tailored plans in mind. Specifically for them, we do think it's helpful for other professionals going into disaster operations. The training is streamable on YouTube, so professionals can take the training anytime, including just hours before they enter a shelter. The just-in-time training is a little less than an hour long, so we hope that people will find that they can fit it into possibly a quite brief time. And of course, it would be great if they could take it more in advance of the time when they actually deploy. It also is broken into different chapters. So you can go to a specific part of the event. I think there are 5 different sections of the total sections of the training, and you can negotiate to go to the part that you're most interested in, or perhaps that you want to review. We worked very hard to make it concise, including only essential information. It's accessible on computers, mobile phones, and other devices. These are the goals or outcomes we intend. There's a big emphasis on learning to coordinate with emergency response efforts, and so I'll show you a little bit of that. We want to help folks provide high-quality behavioral health services during times of disaster, and to manage the complexities of serving as a mental health professional in a disaster. The training has 3 main sections and then a panel discussion. And you see them here, an overview of disasters and disaster operations, and then some basics of disaster behavioral health, and then interventions in disaster behavioral health. Let's see. The overview, the goal is to familiarize providers with the structure and function of disaster operations so that they can quickly understand the environment that they're going to be working in. The focus is on shelters, but it applies to other disaster operations as well. We talk about general principles that apply in all shelters. And then we go into more detail on how shelters and other operations are set up, which then leads into how do you enter a disaster operation? What are the first steps you should make, particularly around connecting with staff that are there, like the shelter manager, other disaster mental health workers, and other folks that are important to the work. The next section is the disaster behavioral health basics, and that starts with key concepts or assumptions of disaster behavioral health. Talk about reactions and what influences reactions of people who are caught in a disaster. And the focus is on survivors and disaster workers. Both are affected in disaster, and certain disaster behavioral health services should be free, accessible, and as we've discussed today, reflect cultural competence or cultural responsiveness to be effective. Section on interventions starts with basic principles. It amplifies the benefits. It amplifies the message of, that everyone in a disaster operation may need support. And then it goes through 8 different steps of psychological first aid. This is the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and National Center for PTSD version, which overlaps greatly, for example, with the Red Cross version, and viewing this as a central intervention, and it then shares information about self-care. And in the final section, it's in a Q&A format, but there's really one main question, which you see here. And in this section, the presenters present some of their personal observations and experiences of having having participated in disaster work. I do want to make the point that we think it's important. It's a good idea for standard plans and tailored plans to encourage their providers to get thorough psychological first aid training. The training that I just described goes over the steps in those, but it's not a thorough training in psychological first aid. It's best used as kind of a reminder and a review for somebody about to go into a disaster operation of training that they've had, which is available, as I say, from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and the same one is from the PTSD National Center, but you can get training in psychological first aid from other sources like the American Red Cross, which is part of the training as a disaster mental health professional. And then Robin Gurwitch is doing these trainings. We've had one of those, and many of you participated. That was an excellent training in psychological first aid. So that's it for that part of it. I don't know, are there any questions in the chat? Christine?
Andy, hey, this is Christina. If you mentioned this already, forgive me, but I know that we've been editing it and pooling resources. Is the training posted yet, or is that page still being developed?
It is developed, and we will, I guess we should send, we can send it out with the other information we'll be sending out. We have a web page that will have a link to it, and also has links to other resources like the organizations that I was just referring to. And that page will of course develop as we get new resources. But that's going to be the method. And yeah, we're ready to send it out, and we've sort of been, it's ready to go. I think maybe finishing up preparing for this meeting kept us from sending it out over the weekend. So we'll get that done. I think that's it. Well, that was a very fast, vigorous discussion. Really appreciate you're all participating. And thank you. Thanks so much to all the presenters who we really put in a tough spot with the brevity of what we asked them to cover a lot in a short period of time. And thank you, Christina, for your ongoing fantastic work on behalf of folks impacted by disaster.
Thank you. I hope everyone has a great week.
Yeah.
And links and attachments will be sent out forthcoming.
Take care.
All right,
Thank
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.